The America joins Great Britain, Free France, led by Charles de Gaulle, and the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, of course, America led by FDR and Britain led by Churchill. The Army Chief of Staff, George Marshall, wants an invasion of France in the summer of 1943. Stalin is getting pounded by the German army, and he wants help immediately. And he is going to FDR and Churchill and begging for them to invade Germany to take some of the pressure off of Stalin. Dwight D. Eisenhower, a general in the American Army, who's going to be important going forward, is put in charge of the operation to plan the invasion of Germany. Britain wants to nibble at Africa first. Germany has taken northern Africa, and then come up through Italy before planning an invasion of France. FDR agrees with Churchill. Everybody wants America to get involved immediately because both Britain and the Soviet Union are getting hit hard. And make no mistake, Churchill and FDR are no fans of the communists. They're no fans of Stalin. And they're not that heartbroken to see Germany and Russia destroying each other. And so it's not a coincidence that they decide to wait to relieve Germany. The first significant action America will be involved in the European theater will not be in Europe, it'll be in Africa. In October of 1942, the British general Montgomery will wage war in Africa against the German genius. He had written textbooks on war, Erwin Rommel, General Rommel. And they're battling for control of the Suez Canal. And of course, the Suez is vital. If you look here on the map there, it's on the bottom right corner, because it controls access to the Mediterranean on the eastern side. El Alamein is the first victory that America is involved in the European theater. This is a battle that liberates Egypt. It takes place on October 23rd of 1942 and is celebrated as a great success here in America.
Throughout 1942, British and German forces clashed in only one ground battle. North Africa had already seen a British victory in December 1941, when the siege of Tobruk was lifted. But 6 months later, Tobruk was back in Axis hands. It seemed only a matter of time before the fall of Cairo and the end of the Allied presence in North Africa. But the Egyptian capital was saved. By the end of 1942, the Axis forces faced crushing defeat in the North African desert. This turning of the tide was the direct consequence of one epic battle, a 12-day confrontation that gave a hint of things to come. The whole complexion of the war was beginning to change. The North African engagement that began in October 1942 revealed a huge imbalance of resources.
Excitement about the American victory at El Alamein is tempered, though, when the American General George Patton is defeated by Rommel at the Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. But Patton is able to regroup his forces and team up with the British General Montgomery and ultimately drive Rommel from Africa by May of 1943. The invasion of Africa, and it takes longer than the Americans believed it would, and it pushes the invasion of France, which had been planned for the summer of 1943, back a year into the summer of 1944. As you can imagine, Stalin and the Soviets are pretty angry about this. They were already mad that the British and the Americans weren't invading France in 1942. But the survival of the USSR has begun to seem much more likely after Hitler makes a disastrous mistake and attacks the German city of Stalingrad, which had no particular military or strategic value. It was attacked primarily because it was named after Stalin, and Hitler wanted to insult Stalin. The Battle of Stalingrad is possibly the most ferocious and destructive battle in the history of the world. More than 1 million people will die as the fighting goes on for a year. It is said that at the end of Stalingrad, you could walk from one side of the city to the other with your feet never touching the ground, touching only bodies. There's a tank factory in Stalingrad, a Russian tank factory, that never stops producing tanks. And the tanks are still firing as they roll off of the assembly line. And most of the tanks simply roll out of the doors of the factory to get immediately blown up in the yard of the factory and have to be pushed out of the way to make more tanks. The weather is cold. There is no food. It's an incredible battle. There's a great book about it called Enemy at the Gates you might check out. That's, by the way, a female sniper there. who had dozens and dozens of kills, and the greatest sniper, I think over 100, and the greatest sniper in the history of the world, probably Vasily Zaitsev, will kill something like 300 or 400 Germans in the course of the year of that war, which is really an unparalleled record of personal destruction. But after the defeat at Stalingrad, though, the Germans eventually will run out of supplies and be forced to surrender after being there for a year. The German army tries to pull out of Russia, only to be crushed at the Battle of Kursk, which is the largest tank battle in the history of warfare. And this is where the most intense fighting was, where the most death and destruction was in the German-Russian battles on Russian soil. FDR, after the conquest of Africa, or the liberation, I should say, of Africa, agrees with Winston Churchill on a plan to then invade Sicily. So we're still not going into France. On July 9th of 1943, the Americans and the British invade Sicily. Mussolini runs away and is actually caught by the British people and killed, and strung up publicly for everyone to see and left there for quite some time. The Germans set up a line of defense south of Rome, I guess until May of 1944, to break through that German defensive line. But on June 4th of 1944, Rome falls and the first of the great Axis powers has been defeated. But again, this pushes D-Day back even further, D-Day being the invasion of France by the Americans and the British. And Stalin gets madder. By then, Stalin had smashed the German offensive capability. The truth is, before America goes into France, the Russians have already destroyed Germany's ability to expand, and now Hitler's goal is simply to maintain what he's already taken. Stalin is now on the offensive, and the Russian army begins rolling inexorably towards Berlin.